Well, Darren, when Roundup crops first came out, we thought, oh, that's it. No more use for any other herbicides. All we really need is Roundup, right?
Well, that was almost the answer. I mean, you think about just about every weed that we had, Roundup did a nice job.
Yep.
The problem is over time, there's been a weed shift and even some resistance in certain cases. And now we're right back to it. Okay, well, if Roundup doesn't kill it, I'm back to a lot of those same choices I had before in conventional corn.
Yep, so what we wanted to get into today, and we're going to talk about this more in season when you're actually spraying these products, but we thought it would be a good time today to discuss these things a little bit because chances are you're prepaying and you're making decisions with your agronomist right now going into 2012 saying, hey, I had some problems with my Roundup last year. I need a tank mix partner. What should I be using? We wanted to give you what a few of the options are.
Let's just look at some of these big weed species and let's start with the small-seeded broadleaves. Just in general, things like lamb's quarters and pigweeds, those types of weeds are getting to be pretty tough to kill. So we have to have something in the package that's going to control those small-seeded broadleaves. The primary product that we've been using on our farm that's really been a big seller across the country has been Status. When you think about small-seeded broadleaf control, this one probably gets the widest variety of weeds overall.
Well, I've said it on the show before, but quite often when I have farmers say to me, you know, what can I use to control my weeds in corn? And I'll say, well, which specific weeds do you have? And they'll say, all of them. My answer is usually use Status. That's got the broadest spectrum. Okay, the only problems that we've got with Status, we like to spray it real early in the season because there's a little bit of drift potential. It's not super bad or anything. It's not nearly as bad as the old Banvel, but still, there is some drift potential. So we want to spray it early and we don't want to have to worry about the drift thing. So in other words, if you're spraying big corn, we're probably not generally using Status. And then the other thing is, if you're very concerned about drift and you have other sensitive crops right next to it, then you may go for another choice as well. But otherwise, Status is an excellent product. And the use rate we're talking about here, 2.5 ounces would be the low rate. 5 ounces is kind of considered the high rate. But if you really had some major problems, you actually could bump that 5 ounce rate to 7.5 ounces. Just check the label to make sure that you're good in your area. But you certainly could do that if you have major problems. And roughly what we're talking about for money here, the 2.5 ounces is going to be around $5-6 an acre, and the 5 ounces is around 10 to 12.
Well, the other thing, Brian, with Status is that BASF has some programs this year where if you use 3 BASF products, you're going to get a special deal. Well, for many guys, they say, wait a minute, 3 products, which ones would I use? Well, Headline is a very popular fungicide. The Kicksor family of products have gotten very popular.
Okay.
And you throw Status in, all of a sudden, you know, you may choose Status based on the total program you're doing.
I'm glad that you brought that up because this is one of the big things that ends up happening with farmers. We'll say, all right, agronomically, Status might be your best choice. Now, I'm not saying it is in all cases, but just hear me out here, all right? Let's say that Status was your best agronomic choice, but the farmer comes to you and says, you know, I'm planting NK corn, and I got this deal with Syngenta, so I really want to go Callisto on everything. And so all of a sudden it becomes, well, maybe not in this particular case we have the best agronomic choice, but we're doing it for economic reasons. It's something you have to consider as a farmer. Do you want to follow the company's recommendations and what the company's programs are, or do you want to spend an extra $2 or $3 and do the very best thing agronomically? Now, fortunately, a lot of times, the best thing agronomically is also the best economic thing, but this does run into a problem. So Darren mentioned Callisto Loudest Impact. Well, they're not great on wild buckwheat. Status is way better on wild buckwheat. So if you have a wild buckwheat problem, you throw all those other things out the window and you just say, hey, I don't care what kind of a great deal you give me, I'm going Status.
Well, you definitely have to kill your weeds. And when you look at those products, Callisto, Lotus, and Impact, they're excellent products. The thing I like about them is they're a little more crop safe as you get bigger corn compared to a product like Status that has a little bit of dicamba in it. So let's just say we have a little bit bigger corn, or we have a few different weeds out there. Like, for example, velvet leaf. I think Callisto, Lotus, Impact are the best products I've ever seen on velvet leaf in corn, and I also like the fact that they have some degree of residual depending on how much rate you use.
And what's the full rate? What's the half rate? What's the low rate?
Well, when you're talking about Callisto and Lotus, you're looking at 3 ounces is the full rate. With the Impact, that rate is 3/4 of an ounce.
For full rate.
The problem with this whole thing, and the reason that it gets confusing, is because we've been dealt with Roundup Ready rates. We get Roundup Ready rates in our mind that, okay, I just need a little helper. Well, guess what? If you have a resistant pigweed in your field, forget about that helper rate. The Roundup that you're putting in the tank is going to do 0 for you. It's basically going to act like you're spraying water in the field, so you need to use a full rate of Callisto, Loudus, or Impact. So just keep that in mind when you're choosing your rates. Talk with your agronomist about what rate will it take without the Roundup to do a good job.
The other thing is you can throw in just a little bit of atrazine with any of these products and it does seem to help the result, especially when you're talking Callisto, Loudous, and Impact. Okay, we talked about programs just a little bit. With Callisto, Loudous, and Impact, they're virtually the same product, all right? Almost identical. So in other words, this year with Roundup, you can get $3 off your Impact when you're buying name brand Roundup if you're using the full rate of Impact. All right, that's a big deal. So if you say, wow, I can save 30% on Impact versus Callisto or Loudous, why shouldn't I buy that? I can't really come up with a good reason. What I'm trying to tell you is those three are about the same. Now, if you said to me, I got Wild Buckwheat, then I would say, forget about that rebate and you go over here and get Status.
Well, the other choice, Brian, is you could use something completely different. Maybe you say, you know what, I don't want to use any of those products you mentioned. Maybe I like to use Hornet. You know, Hornet's not a bad product. That has Python and Stinger in it, so it does a nice job on Velvetleaf, Venus Mallow.
But it's not going to be
thistle
great on
type
Wild
products.
Buckwheat.
It adds a little something to it. But again, you've got some of the same holes. You miss the Wild Buckwheat. You're not quite as good on the pigweed species as what those other products are. You know, so there's some fits where Hornet may be a good option. There are quite a few guys when you say, well, what's this Hornet? I don't know anything about it. Well, it's the product that's added to your harness or surpass when you start using something like TripleFLEX or SureStart.
Which is why you're
putting that broadleaf product in
Which is
there.
why you're probably not going to want to use it post-emerge. We still encourage you, even if you're throwing in a tank mix partner with Roundup or Ignite, to use something pre-emerge, all right? So if you're using a TripleFLEX or SureStart, don't be using Hornet post-emerge. Then you're doubling up with the same thing. Use something different post-emerge.
Hey, one other thing, Brian, when we talk about adding something to your Roundup or to your Ignite, what about more Roundup or more Ignite?
Right, but you're limited by how much you can use. So on Roundup Ready 2 corn, you can only use 32 ounces of Weather Max or Power Max in one shot. Okay, so if it's going to take 48 ounces to kill the weed, you can't legally do that.
Well, the other thing is if you do have a weed that is resistant to that product, you know, you're not going to help yourself out at all. If you have a resistant pigweed and you just spray more Roundup, it does no good. Trust me, many people have tried. It doesn't work. And with Ignite, if you're just going to add more Ignite in, now again, you're using just one mode of action, and that may work for a few years, but we don't want to run into the same problem with Liberty Link crops as we have with Roundup Ready crops. So do mix things up and use multiple modes of action when possible.
Well, once again, we are seeing a lot of Roundup resistant weeds around the country, which is why many farmers are using a tank mix partner with their Roundup, and some farmers are using a tank mix partner with their Ignite. We'd suggest that you talk to your agronomist and see what would fit best for your area.
But will any of these products kill our weed of the week? We'll show you what will coming up later in the show.